folks, welcome back to Dallen Africa. This is Chris once again. Hey folks, welcome back to Chris Wyatt Africa here on the Rugby Ascendant segment. It's St. Patrick's Day, hence the reason I'm wearing an Irish Rugby Football Union 2019 home jersey from Japan. There you go, folks. Yeah, it is St. Patrick's Day. Happy St. Patrick's Day to anyone who's Irish out there, has a little bit of Irish in them, or just enjoys the Irish. Got a little Irish in me. So happy St. Patrick's Day. I'm kind of excited about today. We are just days away, literally hours almost, from the launch of the 2021 Major League Rugby season, the fourth season here in the U.S. And today my special feature guest is none other than USA Eagle 7 star and rugby broadcaster for some time now. Done the HSBC 7 series. He was the voice of the Colorado Glendale Raptors for a long time. Now the voice of the New England Free Jacks. And also teamed up with Joel Stransky during the 2019 Rugby World Cup. We linked up in Japan. It was pretty awesome. You've seen him here on the channel before. None other than Dallen Stanford. Well, here he is. Dallen, how's it going, my friend?
Going really well, my friend. Thank you so much for getting me on, Father Christmas.
Father Christmas. I love it. Yeah. So I see you've got, that looks like a Free Jacks jersey.
Yes, it does. So my wife and I relocated. She's from New England, from Massachusetts region, relocated June last year when the world kind of stopped. And we've been here ever since and enjoying our new adventures, freezing in the winter, so we might not be back.
I was going to say, it's a little different in LA. I'm just saying. And a lot different than the Cape Town, Western Cape area. So,
yeah, this is probably our last winter here, she said.
She's from there. And honestly, this was, well, it wasn't a mild winter, but it wasn't a particularly harsh one. It was kind of an average winter. So imagine a harsh
average one. Yeah, average for you, exactly. Yeah, for us, it was absolutely crazy. I once went out in shorts and T-shirts and almost froze to death. And so I've had to change my game. The Free Jacks have sent me a bunch of warm gear, so I'm very, very warm now and happy.
Well, I'll have to get myself some sort of club affiliation to get that free kit. But seriously, hey, listen, so let's get right into it, Dallen. So you've been covering Major League Rugby since the outset, haven't you, as a broadcaster?
That's right, yeah. So basically my role in the broadcasting world for Major League Rugby has been to cover various teams. And so while I did do every game at Infinity Park for the Colorado Raptors, I still did a bunch of other games. And the same is this year. So while I'm doing content creation for the Free Jacks, I'm still commentating a bunch of different games. And this weekend, it happens to be the Free Jacks in LA. So I get to go at least get a bit of warm weather as well.
Get a little bit of a home trip there. That's nice. Yeah. Well, in fact, we did link up with each other at Coney Island there for a Rugby United game. That was pretty good.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really great to be able to, explore more of the East Coast teams, having lived on the West Coast for about 15 years. It's awesome to see what they're doing in the community and also, how they train in these crazy conditions, training indoors for the most part. And we saw some images of the New York side digging out their field out of snow. I mean, those things you don't deal with on the West Coast. So it brings a different level of intensity to their play. And you can see why the people here are a bit more gritty as well.
A little hardier, maybe that's the right word. Yeah. Well, I mean, maybe everybody can get a taste of what Toronto's been going through for their warm-ups. Yikes.
That's right, exactly. But now listen, Toronto done an interesting thing. They've moved across to Atlanta, Georgia. So the weather obviously much better for them there. So we'll see if that has a positive effect on their game as well.
Yeah, no, that would definitely make a difference. I mean, part of the problem here is with the pandemic, we've got these problems. You see the hockey teams are playing in one conference, like in Canada, and we see that in the American Hockey League, same sort of thing. And so obviously with rugby, the only Canadian franchise at the moment is Toronto, so it makes sense for them to come south just to make sure they're inside the wire, so to speak, just to make sure there's any problems. No problems. Yeah. So one of the challenges with Major League Rugby the first season was that there were, I think, 7 teams or something like that, and they were spread around the country, but they were sprinkled in the Southwest and in California and in Colorado and Utah, and it was difficult for folks to get kind of a feel on a competitive basis. But now we've got two conferences, last year and this year. We've got a Western Conference and an Eastern Conference. Do you see a favorite team before we even get into talking about the teams in either one of those conferences? I think it's a tough call.
It is a very tough call. A lot has changed since Seattle won the first 2 years. Last year, San Diego Legion was so powerful, signing, famous All Black Anonu, and they had a brilliant team. So they were looking to run through. And again, you never know how the season would end, obviously. We saw, the final was pretty crazy both years in 2018 and 2019. So it's tough to choose a front runner. San Diego, I think we're going to be very powerful again. The East Coast, there are a bunch of new teams as well. For example, the Free Jacks, I'm getting to know them a bit better, and they have a bunch of new signings. So a lot of these sides are quite different looking to what they did even last year. So it's really tough to pick pick a winner. I know you're going to put me on the spot later.
That's right. Yeah, we'll put you on the spot at the end. That way you can't slip away from me. But no, as you mentioned, Seattle won it the first 2 years, and some people coming into the season, particularly since we had such a long layoff with the season being suspended after just five games last year, a lot of people might just assume that Seattle is the top team, and they could very well be. But as you mentioned, there's been a lot of signings. I mean, LA is a new team, but they've got Matt Giddo right out of the bat. Huge signing from Australia. And as I was telling you before we went on air, I'm a Rudy fan, Rugby United New York. But I might have to change allegiance. I noticed that the San Diego Legion already had Joe Peterson, a fan of him. Now Bjorn Basson is there and Chris Robshaw. I mean, these signings are really interesting.
Yeah, and then San Diego has Cecil Africa from the Sevens World Series.
Cecil Africa, that's right. Yeah, I forgot that. Yep.
Yeah, and so I think what's great about it, number one, first of all, these big signings, they bring their fan base along as well to the US, which is very important. So a lot of people say, oh, what's the point of spending X amount of money of your salary cap for an international signing when they could walk the streets here and not be recognized? And while I do understand that sentiment, it's important that the overseas fans and international followers take hold of Major League Rugby and want to watch it week in and week out. So each team has that marquee player. And you mentioned Los Angeles. Well, they have two marquee players in that 200 capped Australian Wallabies in Adam Ashley Cooper and now Matt Ghetto as well. So that certainly raises the profile of the team. It raises the league. It raises the level. So while these players might not be in their prime, they're imparting knowledge on the younger generation. A lot of American players are going to get exposed to these players. So imagine being, a young utility back or fly half or center, and you got Ghetto telling you, this is how we run it. This is how we do it. This is how we made the Rugby World Cup final, things like that. So those are invaluable, I think, game here in the US.
No, I absolutely agree. People ask the same question to me. They said, well, so what? They signed these big names. Nobody in the U.S. knows who they are. And I said, exactly like you said, you're missing the point. That's the true value of this. Not only the experience you talk about, but also the fact, Cecil Africa playing here, he has a huge fan base in South Africa. Blitzbach fans love him with good reason. Amazing athlete. I was really excited to see his signing. That's really awesome. And I think that, as you say, a lot of people from overseas, as long as they can watch the games, are probably going to tune in, and that'll help the game here in the U.S.
No, it certainly will, Chris. And one other thing to add is, when you're a new fan and you don't know anybody in your team, and then you go watch and you see Africa light it up, you're like, well, who's that player? And then you find out a bit more about, oh, rugby's played in South Africa as well, and there's a Sevens World Series. So you then, hear the stories about players and understand the global nature of the game. I think that's very important too. Here in the US, we're quite fixated on our regions and our areas, and the sports are really successful here, but they don't know that, the US in the men's 15 aside are, only ranked in the teens in the world. Sevens, the men and women, of course, are on the top couple in the world. But it's interesting to know that the game obviously is played everywhere else and that it's a passport to travel the world as well.
Well, honestly, I agree with you 100%. I was not a major fan of sevens back when you played. It wasn't really available. That's not why I didn't like or dislike it. You just couldn't see it much. And then one day I saw this oak called Carlin Isles. And what the heck? Look at that guy go. He's unbelievable. And then we got rewarded with Perry Baker, and it's like no turning back. Sevens rocks. It just takes a good quality athlete to get your attention and draw you into the game. And I think these signings will probably help with that.
Yeah, they certainly will. And then on the women's side as well, you've got like Anaya Tapper or Lev Kelter, players that have come from other sports as well. And now they're like, well, now I can go to the Olympic Games, represent the USA, and be one of the world beaters as well. And so I really, really hope that, when the Olympics does take place, that the women and the men can get on that podium. And that'll be so important for our game, 15s as well.
Well, I do hope that it happens this year. It's all in the air right now, what's going on with Japan. There's all sorts of options on the table. It might just be no fans, only Japanese nationals in Japan, no international travels, maybe international travels, maybe limited. We don't know what's going to happen, but you can't keep world-class athletes on the hook forever. Cecil Africa wanted to compete in the Olympics last year, but it was postponed, so he announced his retirement, and that's a shame for him because the Blitzbach, I think I got bronze last time. We were expecting him to get gold. I think I got bronze in Rio. I think that's what it was, yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So, so the Western Conference, if you look at these two conferences, Western, Eastern Conference, the Western Conference has 5 of the original franchises, right? And the Eastern Conference just has the 1. So does that give the Western Conference an advantage over the Eastern Conference, do you think, in competition or no?
Well, that's a good point. I think it's a disadvantage for the Western Conference teams because you've got teams that have been established right from the beginning, and each year they're going to improve certain things. They're going to tweak things on the field. They're going to tweak things off the field with their management and coaching staff, get new players, fill holes that didn't work. Good example of that, is that a couple of teams struggled with their tight five in the first year, and they were exposed by other teams that had stronger packs. Well, what happened the next year? They bulked up, and their signings were based on the tight five. So the Legion, for example, were very good in the first 2 years of realizing where they need to fill the gaps. And last year, they had built an unbelievable squad. Unfortunately, the head coach has moved on, Rob Hoadley, and some of the players have left as well. But I think you want to be in a conference if you're starting, if you're a side that is starting out, you want to be with a bunch of other teams that are starting out and trying to figure it out as well. So I do think that's kind of the way teams look at it as well. Like the Free Jacks, a good example last year, while they beat New York their very first game, they struggled in the next four. They lost them on the road, and so now they've made a lot of changes to adapt to that. And of course, it also talks about off the field. There are things like your investment group, your partners you bring on, your sponsors, all those things need time to develop, and that's how you can improve the on-field product.
No, absolutely. And you see that across the board. For instance, Old Glory DC has a partnership with Scottish Rugby Union, which has been paying dividends and benefits for them. It's interesting to see that. But with that topic that we're just talking about, so the question of new teams having an advantage or how they do. Last year, we saw some new teams come right out of the gate. For instance, Old Glory came out, and I watched them in their preseason games, their scrub matches, their I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? Not scrub, but exhibition games the previous season. And I was ready to put some cleats on and go out there and play on the left wing. I mean, I thought I had a chance. I'm not trying to talk down about Old Glory, but it looked a little rough at the start. But then they came out in their first actual season last year like gangbusters. They went 4-1. I was really impressed by that. Atlanta came out and they were 2-3, but two of those losses included a 3-point loss to Rooney and a 2-point loss to Old Glory. So it wasn't like they were scrubs. As you mentioned, the New England Free Jackets came out right out of the gate and they had a big win over Rooney, and then they kind of tailed off. So it's really tough, I think, to say. But this is interesting when you think about it. As you and I were talking offline a little bit earlier, in other sports, particularly like National Hockey League, Major League Baseball, National Football League, when a new franchise comes along and joins an existing league, they've got to start from scratch and build it up, build a team culture, sign all the players, gel, and come out. And it's rare that you get a Las Vegas Golden Knights team that goes to the final in its first season. But in Major League Rugby, given the newness of the league and given the ability of people to bring together with coaching and with resources, there's a real possibility that a debutante like maybe LA could go all the way. What do you think?
Yeah, well, that's the great thing, right? It's so new. Technically, while it's season 4, it's really the third year because you only played a few weeks last year. And so it's so fresh that anybody can take it. Now, the interesting thing about LA is that the owner, Adam Gilchrist, the Australian owner, owns 2 teams. The only person to do so in Major League Rugby, Austin and LA. So they've played a scrimmage together. Both those teams are bolstered up with a bunch of new signings and new talent. And I feel like without that money invested in, those teams would have struggled. Austin went 0-16 in year 1. Now, I believe they could be in contention for the West Coast final, Western Conference final, if you will. So it is interesting, and you're right. Bringing in the right resources with the right coaching staff, any of the teams could win. I know people say that it's quite cliched, but it really, really could happen. And that's why when you put me on the spot here, who's going to win? It's just a random guess because there are so many sides on each coast that I think could do so well.
Absolutely. Now, that also raised a question, too. So, I mean, you don't have to answer this one, but now it makes a little more sense now that I've heard the name of the owner of those franchises, the renaming of one franchise and the naming of the LA franchise. I was a little puzzled by that, but now it's starting to make sense.
Chris, I don't think you were the only one puzzled. There's quite a large outcry, when the Giltinis and Gilgronis got their names. We still love to taste what those soon-to-be cocktail drinks would taste like. But it's going to be tough when commentating that game, right? Because you got the Gilgronis, the Giltinis. It doesn't roll off the tongue so well. So I think I'm just going to go with Los Angeles and Austin.
Well, I think that's probably a wise move, Dallen. I think I'll back that one. I'm in that corner with you. Okay, so speaking of names, okay, now you're inside the wire with Major League Rugby, so I don't want to put you on the spot, but hey, I'm going to put you on the spot anyway. So just get your feedback on this one. So the East and the West Conference, not very exciting. You know what I mean? The National Hockey League used to have the Norris Division and the Smythe Division and all these different things, and so there was some history to it. East and West, has Major League Rugby considered, coming out with some sort of name to recognize people from historic rugby? Is that in the development, or are we going to be stuck with East and West into perpetuity?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting one that you say that. For me, I think it's quite nice because it does, like, if you're an international person tuning in, you might know what the conferences are called. So that does kind of delineate, oh, okay, that's the East Coast of America, that's the West Coast. So I think starting out, it makes sense and it's a good idea. But you're right, moving on, maybe they will look to change it. Give me some of your ideas. Would you name them?
Stanford, Wyatt. Just off the top of my head. No. Well, I mean, obviously, we're probably not gonna take the obvious one, the William Webb Ellis Conference. That's obviously not gonna happen. And the thing is that the U.S. didn't have a national team for such a long time after the early Olympics in 1920, 24. It was until 84 we finally reestablished a formal national team. There's not a lot of names out there that people would know from American rugby history, so it's kind of tough. And it can't just be American; it's got to be North American because Canada's in the mix too. But yeah, I don't really have a name for it. I didn't come with a solution here, Dallen. I just came with a question. It's only on South Africa policy that I offer solutions, or U.S. policy, not on rugby. No, just kidding. But hopefully sometime down the road. I mean, it's early days. We'll see what happens. But of course, the pandemic last year. We see that the season starting this year is being pushed back a little bit later. Now, in the previous seasons, it started in late January, and that probably explains why Toronto was on the road for its early games because they didn't want to play in 3 feet of snow in Toronto in January. But moving the season to March probably has some advantages and disadvantages. In a normal course of events, if there was no pandemic, you'd be competing head-to-head with baseball right now, with the NBA Finals, with the NHL Finals and stuff like that. But I think there's probably some real advantages moving it, not just because we have to get things settled with the pandemic and what is and isn't happening with prohibitions on spectators or limited seating and that sort of thing, but also because the weather, I mean, unless you're a deep South team like NOLA or, Austin or something like that, you're probably going to profit from the fact that you got some better weather to play in.
Yeah, Chris, that's a good point. I think you're talking about Toronto, you're 100% right. I think they had to play I think they had 8 games or 7 of their last 8 weekends were at home because of the conditions. So they had to go on the road for the first 8 weeks. What people don't take into account, if you really analyze the seasons, is that that's really challenging. While there are positives for traveling because you get to bond with your team a bit better, you get to establish that chemistry. And if you do pick up a few away wins, that's great. It sets you up for success when you do eventually come home. But again, you don't want an imbalanced schedule like that. You certainly want it right from the start, a bit of a mixed bag, which is what they have now. So teams like from the New England side, for example, they'll be in LA, but then they'll come home in 2 weeks' time. They will play April 3rd at home for the very first time, which is great. So I do think that's better for the schedule. And again, if you're a rugby player, you're going to be your whole year is going to be if you sign in Major League Rugby, you're not going to be playing somewhere else. So the time doesn't really matter to the player per se. You don't want to clash too much with the American landscape schedule. So the TV schedule is important because you do want to get the game spread, of course, to a wider audience, and that's vital. So I think those are definitely good points.
Well, one of the questions that people put out there, especially in the international world, people, especially from South Africa, always ask me is about, but what about the level of competition? I mean, it's not really up to the Mitre 14 or Mitre 10. It's not up to the Pro League 14 in France or Premier League in England or Guinness Pro 14 or even Currie Cup or Super Rugby. But let me get your take on this. My personal view as a fan going to games is that the quality of competition may not have been sterling the first year, but it did improve the second year. And early last year, it was looking a lot better for a number of clubs. And I think that it's only going to get better. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean that's the great thing about starting a new league is that you in all different departments you're going to keep improving. We'll talk about the broadcast later and the exciting things happening there. On the field, the product is definitely improving, and it's improving not just for a few teams, all the teams. And so the nice thing is you mentioned some of those star signings. Well, if you look at a side like Austin, they've got a former All Black front rower Jamie McIntosh. They've got Isaac Ross in the lock position. While those are older players, they're player coach roles, helping the next players come through, improving the level and the technique and the expertise. Andy Ellis, the former All Black scrum half, is with New York. You got a bunch of other names we mentioned. So all those international players raise the level as well. And then of course you got the collegiate draft. So you got young rugby players that are now actively pursuing careers in the sport, knowing they can get paid to play rugby, and that is only good for the national game here. And so I know Gary Gold is super excited, to select his national team squad because now for the very first time they've got a decent league that's improving year on year. And yes, it might not compare with the Super Rugbies of the world or the Premiership yet, but in years to come it will. And in years to come, you'll have younger players from overseas coming here as well, which I think is important too. Not just folks that are, going to retire, but they're like, let me just play 1 year in the US.
Well, one of the things I've told people for years about rugby is the outside the U.S. that is, and they a lot of people look at me with a skewed eye, like, well, of course you'll say that, you're an American, but no, I think it was an objective position. You tell me, because you're from both sides of the fence. You're from South Africa originally, and you're an American. So tell me what you think of this. This has been my take for a long time. If you want rugby to make it big time on the global scene, you have to leverage the largest media television market on the planet, which is the U.S. So you've got to get the game to catch on, or at least be popular here to some degree, if you want to bring in that big TV revenue, which is how you really make the game grow, because you have the resources to push down to youth and to raising the level of competition up and having clubs. That's been my position for a long time. And when Super Rugby talked about expanding, went from 12 to 14 to 15 to 18, which was a bit too far, we came back down. But when it did that, one of my arguments was that you might consider Hawaii, or LA or San Diego, even though I'm not a fan of LA or San Diego. I mean, you might consider that. And of course, there were disadvantages to it, but they went with Japan and they added an Argentine team. But so let me refine that a little bit. So my point was always that for rugby to become a massive, it's a big global success. That's fair. But for World Rugby Union to be a massive global success, you have to have Americans involved in the game and the market. Otherwise, it's never going to reach that level. That was my position. Do you think that was a purely American pro-bias position, or do you think I was objective in that assessment?
No, Chris, the assessment is spot on. When you speak to anyone else involved in the sport around the world, everybody looks to America as the number one sports market on the planet, and that's without a doubt. And the success can be seen, as you said, in these great broadcast deals and all the other sports here in the US. Rugby is still that developing game, and with television partners now showing the game more broadly, and free to air, which is going to be on the Rugby Network now. So things like that are going to be huge for the game, which are going to expand it and obviously get it to audiences that don't normally see the sport. I think the biggest thing, when I came to the US, in the early 2000s. Whenever a friend came to watch us play, or we went to the Sevens, which was in San Diego then, before it moved to Los Angeles, before it moved to Vegas and then LA, they watched it and they were like, "This sport's crazy. I love it." They were like, "What are you guys doing?" They didn't obviously understand the rules of the game, the laws, but they were so excited about it. And that's because they got to see it. Yeah. Now, if you can bring the game to people in their homes, they flick to the channels, they see rugby, they might not know exactly what's going on, but they're like, "Wow, this is really cool and exciting." As you said, that's where you lock them in. Then, of course, us as broadcasters and commentators must do a good enough job to reel them in and explain the game, simplify it a little bit. But you're right, that is key. The money is not there yet in terms of, the CBSs, the Fox Sports paying Major League Rugby for the broadcast rights yet. But again, we're only a few years away from that happening. So you're right. I think it's in a good position. They have to start with building a good enough product, having enough better cameras around and coverage of the game so it can get out to the masses. And I think we're slowly getting there. Having the US host a Rugby World Cup would be huge for the sport as well. I know there's a lot of talk and a lot of interest in World Rugby doing that. The Sevens World Cup, when it came to San Francisco, was a huge success. So there are various events that here are happening in the US that obviously everyone else is eagerly watching and seeing when will this game catch on. And again, it's that old cliche where people are like, well, if Americans watch the sport and more people play it that are American athletes with their physique and abilities, the rest of the world will need to watch out. And that we've seen that in Sevens. We will see that in 15s down the line. It's just take a bit more time, I feel.
Well, I agree. My prediction for some time now has been the USA will win the 2035 Rugby World Cup. Hands down. We're going to win it. And I have a long time to be wrong or right.
You do.
A little ways off, just a little ways off. Yikes. So if I can digress for just a second, because not everybody in the audience knows who you are, Dallen. And I got a question here from someone in South Africa. Says, so where did Dallen's rugby career and interest begin? Well, I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell the secret. It was in South Africa. But just let our audience know how you got started in rugby, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Cape Town, and I went to all rugby playing schools there. Rondebosch Boys High School, avid sporting backdrop with like 50 different sports fields. And my biggest thing was I really loved going to those sports fields and playing touch rugby with my friends, like on the weekend. And I would commentate when I played the actual game with them. And so that's kind of where I got my, I suppose, excitement and love for the sport growing up in South Africa, supporting the Springboks. I got a chance to play at UCT, played against Stellenbosch, one of the more famous rugby universities in the world, produced many Springboks. So I kind of really loved and enjoyed that kind of adventure. And then I came to the US on a holiday in 2003. And from that holiday, the rugby club I played with was in LA called the Occidental Old Boys. They got me involved in their 7s and 15s setup, and we ended up going to nationals a couple of years later. They invited me to come back and play, and played in front of the US coach. And so he realized that I'd been married to a US citizen, a few years before that, and I didn't know this was the rule. And I got a chance then to represent the USA in the Sevens World Series from about 2007 to 2009. So that's kind of where my journey led to, and it's just very surreal to be able to run out representing another country. You can hear my accent, but I am an American citizen now, so African American, if you will. And then I've always been interested in broadcasting and marketing and media, and then I got a chance to get into broadcasting in 2012 at Infinity Park in Glendale, Colorado, and then been really blessed to be able to be on the Sevens World Series, to meet you at the Rugby World Cup, to work with Joel Stransky, who's somebody I watched as a young kid in South Africa, kicking a winning drop goal for the South African side, the Rainbow Nation. So it's really been full circle, and pretty blessed to be now obviously here in the US and leading the frontier on the rugby side.
Yeah, no, it's quite a rugby career, quite a rugby path. Thanks for sharing that very quickly. Because like I said, not everyone in the audience knows about you or who you are. But you mentioned that in Japan, we linked up that time in Kobe, I think it was, yeah. And you came out, and some people came over and said and got your attention, but you saw me. We got together pretty quick. Joel came out, and we couldn't get to Joel. It was like 10,000 people descended on him. Of course, we had to fight through the crowd to get him out there. But it was awesome. You guys were a great team, by the way. I don't mean to blow smoke up your skirt, but you and Joel were a great broadcasting team. Really enjoyed your listening to them because I couldn't listen when I was there watching the game, so I watched them in replays after the fact. And of course, you got one of those little clips in that lovely little animated piece that guy does, who does all the sports stuff. It's like Gareth Davis. That's great. That's great. Anyway, people don't know what we're talking about. Go look it up.
No, it was so much fun. And to work with, Joel Stransky, such a professional, and what an unbelievable career he had as a rugby player and broadcaster and giving back to various communities in South Africa, those in need. I think it's so wonderful. He's used the platform so successfully. Just a genuine, really nice guy, down to earth, so humble as well. I asked him about obviously I'm spending a month with this guy, right? Traveling around. It is weird being in that position where what this person did, but you don't want to be too fanboyish about it.
You know what I mean? Fanboy. That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, well, exactly. And we're having a drink, and we're talking about '95, obviously, and what it meant, and behind the scenes, and him meeting Nelson Mandela, and talking about Invictus, the movie, was that accurately portrayed, and all the good things. And he said, I haven't actually watched the '95 game back. He goes, I've seen highlights, and every now and again, they show the clip of him kicking and stuff like that. And it's kind of funny, his attitude was and is, highly driven individual, looking for success in everything he does. And once he's achieved that, then moving on to the next adventure. And that's really interesting and really cool. And, some people achieve something and that's what they sit on for the rest of their life. And they'll be known for that, obviously, for the rest of their life. But this guy was getting up. We were commentating, obviously, every few days. And he would go on like 100-kilometer cycle. He'd go on a 20-mile run. He was just so active and so fit, a triathlete nonstop. Honestly, just such good guy and in good shape.
No, I get that entirely, and I have nothing but respect for it. People look at me and like, oh, you're retired. I'm like, no, I left active duty because I reached my max service date. And then they ask me, what do you do? And I tell them, and then they find out I'm a colonel. Oh, you're a colonel. Yeah, but no, but it's the next chapter now. I'm doing something else. That was just 36 years of my life. That's not the entire path. So I appreciate that. That's really awesome. Well, let me go back just a second, because I meant to ask you this earlier when we were talking about the start date for the conference for the season. Do you think there are any disadvantages to playing this summer? I could think that, for instance, maybe playing in New Orleans in July might be miserable.
Yeah, no, you're so right. But I suppose the nice thing about the conditions there is that at least the game will take place, right? That's very important compared to we had some weekends where games could potentially be snowed out if it was too early in the fall. Yeah. So the heat definitely has a factor. I think the tricky one is some people had a question, because even last year the finals and semifinals were going to take place during June, which is an international window as well, where the US Eagles could play, which means they would draw a lot of players from the teams. You can't really avoid that because the season is going to be 5 months long or so, and whether you start in January or whether you start a little bit later, you're still going to run over that deadline. I suppose one thing is, people say that, well, even in the other leagues, around the world, if their national team plays, obviously that's a priority, so they lose those players, but they're going into it. So you sign a Cheslin Colbert, he's going to be playing for the Springboks, so you just have to have backups in place and cover that. You just hope it's not in the semis and finals, but you kind of have every team has to deal with that.
Well, but you make a valid point. I mean, this is a problem that Super Rugby faces. This is a problem that Premiership, all these leagues face this, because rugby, honestly, is almost a year-round sport because of the different hemispheres and how popular it is. So you see players disappearing all the time. So you just got to prepare for it and you plan ahead. Good point. That's a really good point. Let's see. So you have you were with the Glendale Raptors. You were the voice of Glendale Raptors. Now, I always thought that Glendale had the unfair Springbok advantage because people had to play at altitude whenever they went to Colorado. So Glendale left the league this year. I don't know the whole story. You don't have to get into it, but I'm just curious. I understand they're going to work, I guess, back at club level or developing the sport. Is there a chance we'll see Glendale come back at some point, or are they just done?
Yeah, I think they're done, Chris. I'll give you a brief outline there, because it is important to know what they're doing, because some people were upset about them leaving the league. They want to go back to their.
I was.
Well, of course. I mean, it helps the game. I feel like their original core philosophy when they founded and built Infinity Park in 2007, 2006, around that time period, was that they wanted to grow the American game, and they certainly have done that because they've been hosts for the women's and men's knockout games, the national championships. They've put on their own sevens tournament. They've promoted it in the community. They have a youth program as well. But they wanted to get back into helping the US succeed at an international level. And the way they felt was that, okay, they could spend all this money and resources in Major League Rugby and be one of the teams, or they could leave that and let the Major League Rugby is going nowhere and it's improving with more teams being added every year, or they could start another venture on the side at the same time. And that basically is developing athletes from other sports in America that haven't potentially, made it in the NFL or some other wrestling or other great sports. And they're teaching them the game of rugby. Now, while it's a lofty and ambitious goal and, could be seen as, some people think it's a waste of money, I think it's an interesting concept for sure. It's called Colorado XO, the XOs in rugby, the details. And so already they've had a few hit-outs. They've taken, I think, about 35 players. They've been in residence. They train at the Rugbytown National Training Center there. They've got the best facilities. And these athletes have shown real promise. They've played against a couple of, Division II sides, scored some really good tries, developing in the set pieces as well, which is very important. But I think it's a long-term project, and there will be certainly results from there. The other thing is, they're also hosting the national body. So USA Rugby relocated from Boulder, Colorado to be in-house at Glendale, Colorado, their facilities there in Infinity Park. And so they're certainly helping and giving some of the expertise and some of their, assets that they have there as well. So they're really helping the national body, which is important because I feel like Major League Rugby and other entities, have been very successful where the governing body has struggled. I mean, the governing body went bankrupt, a year or two ago. So I think they're doing great work in a different side of things.
No, I think it's a great take. And I asked the question. It's not a lot of people know what happened with Glendale, and I was angry. I understood some of that, not all of it. I was angry not because I was a fan, but because I thought they were competitive and they were a great logo. It was a great location, and also that's kind of it's kind of a hub of rugby, one of our hubs of rugby around the country. But yeah, that makes sense. And like you say, bringing players in. I mean, look at all the big names we have in others, like in sevens especially. We've got Perry Baker, used to be a football player, and we've got in the 15s, Paul Lasike, who used to play for the Bears from New Zealand, came over, and then we've also got you said Nia Tapper was a different athlete when she played. So it makes sense to have someone trying to help channel or funnel athletes. They're maybe looking for something else to do, and rugby's a good place to land. So it makes sense for Glendale.
Yeah, it does. And just to quickly add to that, you mentioned Colin Isles. Colin only saw rugby when he turned on the television and there was a sevens. And he's like, and again, sevens is really a great entry point to the game for any athlete coming in, because, you don't need to have the set piece success or anything else like that. You just have to have raw ability. And if you can pick up the game in the sense, and he watched on TV, saw it, message USA Rugby, and there he was. Colin Isles has scored 200 tries in the Sevens World Series. Perry Baker, while he's had a bit of a rugby background, also came from other sports. And so the stories are there. And so they do need a platform and somewhere to play. And I think that the test matches, international games within the US, they'll probably play at Infinity Park because they've got the location, the field there as well. And then when some of the bigger teams come, like when we've seen the All Blacks in the past, they went to something like Soldier Field where they could put, over 70,000 people in there.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So it actually makes a lot of sense, and I understand where they're coming from now. And frankly, 12 teams in the league is probably a good fit for right now. This season, maybe a season or more, and then we'll see how it goes. And speaking of that, attendance at games. So Seattle, historically, since the outset, they've been selling out that stadium. They've been filling it up. Others have had some good attendance. Utah started out well. Others have been a little challenged at getting audiences and spectators in the crowd. But there's some reasons for that, I think. One, it was new. People didn't know about it. Marketing has to come into play. Also, not all the venues were ideal. Utah has a brilliant location. They purpose-built. That's wonderful. And but compare that with, say, Rooney, who was kind of stuck at Coney Island those first couple of years, and not an ideal place to play rugby or even to get to watch rugby. It cost me $50 in tolls, 4 hours of driving, and then nearly losing my chassis driving through potholes to get to that arena, but that stadium. And it's a baseball field and it's turf. I was like, oof. I watched Peaches out there. Every time he played, he'd come out and he had like turf burns all over the place. And I'm like, ooh, maybe I don't want to play rugby anymore.
Well, Chris, I want to tell you, commentating at that venue was the worst I've ever seen because it slanted at an angle because it is a baseball diamond, as you said. So you're behind the baseball mound, but the rugby field is going at the other side. And so basically you're commentating from a side angle, if you will, at an awkward angle. You can't see any jersey numbers from the opposition running towards you, where normally you position the halfway line, so you can kind of see both sides and you can see the angles. Very, very tough. It was a bit of a nightmare commentating there. So we'll see what they do for a venue this year.
Well, it wasn't just that. I mean, you were also in the elements too. I mean, the wind was blowing out there. It was a little distracting. It was the oddest because the previous games they've been up in the booth, but I think they realized they could only see the game from one side, and they couldn't get a good angle. So I guess they figured to put you down there, and I don't think that worked well either. No, I mean, the commentary was great. I'm just saying that it was difficult for you.
The lad was difficult, you're right. But you bring a good point about the bringing people in, because I think that's very important, particularly for, the viability of these franchises. You do need income coming in through the gate. You need to have your merchandise sales and your vendors and everything else like that. Now, COVID's going to be very tricky because every state's going to be different. For example, I go to LA this weekend at the largest rugby stadium there is, obviously, in the US, the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum. Now capacity 77,500. I don't think they're going to allow anybody in that's not part of the broadcast and the team, because I think 2,000 folks so far, tickets sold. I don't know how many more they can get in. It may change by the time the games roll around. Very tricky, very complicated situation currently. But I think you're spot on. Teams like New Orleans were doing a better job as getting people in as well. Seattle, obviously, with a front runner. Even San Diego, while they had some bigger crowds, sometimes the crowds would dwindle. And it's always tricky because you've got your rugby population that may be playing a game that weekend would maybe clash with their schedule. You do need to do a good enough job of attracting people that are non-rugby fans to experience that kind of atmosphere. And the commissioner, George Killebrew, did a good job of explaining to everybody recently when he was on a video chat, was saying that we're in the entertainment industry. And we need to make sure that from when a family leaves the driveway of their house, that they are entertained until they get back. And when they get back home, they're talking about what are we going to do next Saturday or next Sunday. We want to go to that rugby experience again because there's something for everybody. There's something for the young kids. There's something for the families. There's something for a bunch of young women coming there, young men. They've got to cater to everybody.
No, absolutely. I think that's brilliant, and that's a key thing. And it's actually a bargain in many respects. You look at NOLA, $20 to go to a game, and they've taken over a baseball stadium and turned it into a rugby pitch, and it's exclusively for rugby now. I'm actually contemplating a trip because I usually go to the Collegiate Rugby Championship, the CRC. And Penn Mutual has been sponsoring that here in Philadelphia, but it's not in Philadelphia this year. It's in New Orleans. So I'm considering going down for the Utah Warriors and the NOLA game that weekend, and then staying for the CRC and then coming back. It's an idea. But what I'm getting at is that a lot of these tickets are a pretty good deal as long as you can get into the games. I mean, the COVID is the problem, but it's not the ticket prices. But getting seats, I think that's important. Getting bums in the seats really matters. And I think that hopefully this COVID thing will wash away, because this is the season I think it could really take off with attendance.
Yeah, no, you're spot on.
All right, so training camps. People are in training camps now, and the training camps are ending because the first game is Saturday. It's already Saturday, just a couple of days away. Hence the reason for our season preview. Are you hearing anything out of training camps? Anything? Are the players, are the teams, is the management, are people excited? Because last year was just such a letdown. Not from the players, but all of us. It's like it just ended. But that happened everywhere. So are they excited about this season?
Yeah, Chris. I think they're about as excited as Charlie Sheen on a night out. They haven't played rugby in so long, and now finally the competition is here. The preseason is cut short for many teams. They actually couldn't play against opposition, whether they had a positive COVID case in their own camp or they were just concerned. And so, yeah, everybody's ready to go. And again, I think what people do need to understand too is that in other major sports with a lot of financial backing, some games are being postponed or cancelled. We need to be wary that could happen, obviously, in our rugby season coming up. But everybody's raring to go. They just can't wait for that first game. And me personally, it's been 12 months. So I commentate a live rugby game. And so that's really, really exciting to get back in the booth again and do what you love, right? So, yeah, we can't wait to be a part of it this weekend. And I know the teams are just frothing at the mouth.
Okay, so you've just touched on it. In the past, Dallen, I know you're like on almost all the time. Not all the time, but if it's not the HSBC 7 series you're traveling, you're covering Major League Rugby. If it's not that, it's World Rugby or it's test matches. So you've been on the air a lot. Now you're rusty. Have you been watching your old tapes to see
No.
to make sure you're up to the task?
Well, Chris, it's funny. You say you're rusty. I mean, it's different, right? When you're playing, you do need to kind of keep that skill going. I think as a commentator, your main asset is your prep. And so I've been doing a lot of prep this week, gearing up to the first weekend. And so, bar the team Los Angeles not sending me any information yet, I have to do a bit of research there. Outside of that, no, you're ready to go. You're excited. The nice thing about a live rugby game is that as a lead commentator, you really just commenting on obviously what's going on and building that excitement. And so, I commentated my neighbors, bringing back their groceries one day. There's been stuff like that. I've been around the house. My wife is very keen to see me go because obviously I've been so loud and not stop chin wagging, commentating my every movement. So it'll be good. I think you're right. It'll take one game and then we'll be right back into it.
Dallen offloads the gallon of milk. Oh, it's on the floor. That reminds me of that animation again, where I forget which commentary it was, when someone was kicking us into the wind. It's much more difficult than it looks. And remember what that cartoon was? That's hilarious.
You need to link the cartoon so people know what you're talking about. It was unbelievable.
It is a hilarious one. I've used it before. I've shown it before on the program, but I'll put a link up so people know what I'm talking about. All right, so you're no longer with the Raptors. You're out there in New England, where apparently it's cold, and so have you acclimated? I mean, there's no Boerewors, there's no biltong there, there's no LA whatever you eat in LA. Now it's baked beans and clam chowder. Are you making that adjustment?
I am making that adjustment. Look, I've been coming back here in the summers with my wife for the last 15 years or so, and so really enjoy that time period. The fall was beautiful as well, with the leaves changing color. We did a lot of Airbnbs to get out and just see the different parts of here, Vermont and everywhere else. It's so beautiful, Rhode Island. The tricky one is because of COVID, we haven't really obviously been able to connect with people, and there are several South Africans, and one of them, Peter Janssen and Erich de Jager, they apparently want to braai or barbecue 5 times a week. So I know they're ready to rumble. So when things open up, we will join them, and we'll get that South African element going as well. But it's certainly been tough. I mean, normally I'll be playing beach touch rugby 3 times a week in LA, but of course due to COVID and everything else, and due to the snow, it's been tough to get out there.
So you're going to be out there this week. Is Major League Rugby, or maybe yourself or any of the other broadcasters, going to probably highlight the Adam Ashley Cooper and Matt Giddo signings for LA? Because I mean, it seems like a golden opportunity to make a big splash, because I suspect there will be people in Australia who will be watching.
Yes, you got to tune in and listen, my friend. We'll have one-liners ready for them. We'll obviously be building them up, explaining to those that don't know who they are. These are global superstars. I think it's going to be as far as the first weekend goes, a very much a highly anticipated match. And again, it brings that rivalry too between the East and the West Coast, which is really cool and really exciting. And the nice thing is that we finally get a look at Los Angeles, the first time that they did a scrimmage against the Austin franchise last weekend, but we probably get a real good look at them and see what they're all about. And I know that their owner is all about entertainment, so I don't know what they've got planned. I know it will be limiting, but I know in Austin last year they did a bunch of great activations for their fans. So we'll see what they can get up to this weekend.
Well, let's see. So the Gilgronis had a scrimmage against the Gilronis, or I'm LA versus Austin. Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be hard to get our heads around. I thought when I read it the first time, isn't that what they named the Austin Elite? They renamed them that name, didn't they? So I was kind of confused when I saw the LA franchise. Anyway, rather unique. Also kind of puts a little monkey wrench in the family-friendly atmosphere if you name it after a cocktail drink, but I'm just saying. Anyway, but how big is this Matt Giddo and Adam Ashley Cooper signing for Major League Rugby, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's very important to have these global international stars, as I said, join the league. And we had that in Ma'ananu and Bustro joined last time, and Ben Foden at Rugby Night in New York. So each player brings their own following along. It brings their country along that obviously they played for as well. So it opens up these new markets around the globe. And I think it's very important is that if these big TV networks can see, the following online on social media as well, the eyeballs of international audiences also, I think that'll be very encouraging for the game. It will help, obviously, sponsorships. It will help money coming into the sport. The recognition is very important.
Oops. Lost your audio.
America. While they may have seen him play sevens in the World Series, but they're definitely going to be interested in this game for sure.
Lost your audio there, but I think we got the gist of what you were saying. It just disappeared for a second. It's back now.
Okay, good, no problem, my friend. Might have
No,
just been the guiltinis I had earlier.
Whatever that is. We don't know yet. So professional sports, if they want to make it big, as we've talked about, you need those broadcast contracts for the revenue, because that's, the NFL rakes in billions of dollars, Major League Baseball, the same sort of thing, even the NBA. But in the case of rugby, I would argue, I just want to get your view on this, that the money may be important, and it is. You have to be financially viable, but the accessibility of the game, and you sort of alluded to that earlier, introducing the game. Like you said, Carlin Isles is, what the heck is this? I want to play this. And he writes USA Rugby, and next thing he's a superstar, And he's still a superstar. He was amazing, And it's weird having him and Perry Baker on, because Mike Friday is got it, he's got Sophie's choice. I can't put them both on the pitch at the same time. But because it doesn't seem to work when they're both on the pitch. They're both great, and not any mark against either one of them. But when both are on the pitch, you don't get that extra oomph you think you're going to get. So when he kind of staggers them, then the Eagles just run all over everybody. But the point is, there, as a little digression from the television thing, but the point is that so Major League Rugby has contracts with ESPN, with CBS Sports, Fox Sports, TSN in Canada, AT&T Sports Network. These are not things to try flat. These are real deals, and this is going to help the game grow. Do you think that sports networks really have an important role in broadening the reach of the game here and the popularity of rugby in the U.S. and Canada?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. Those are huge names in the broadcasting world, and rugby needs to be seen. It is obviously popular around the world, but here, if you had to walk down the street in a rugby shirt, and if you were Chris Robshaw, the former England captain, nobody would recognize you. And I think that's kind of interesting. We do need to develop those superstars and put them on a platform which these networks provide. They provide access to an audience, millions and millions of people. And so I think that's very important. Of course, it's not the most important thing at this stage. We're still developing the product, and I think the product's certainly getting there. But it is a key element to the success of the game, particularly the future of the game, longevity of it. And I think once the average American person knows a little bit more about rugby, enjoys the game, because it is so similar to American football, but obviously we know with less breaks and there's more play and more action, and I think what intrigues people a lot here is that there are no pads. And so while us as rugby players, that's just normal because we've grown up without wearing any sort of padding as well. The sport is fierce, but of course it's in a controlled environment too. And so a lot of people think rugby players are crazy here in the US, and that's kind of fine. You've got to go with that reputation, and hopefully that attracts more people to it. And then the other element is that it's a game that is played equally by men and women all over, young boys and girls all over. And that's very important. They've got to showcase the community work that's being done and how the sport kind of unites people as well. Talking about Joel Stransky in South Africa, it's while that's a really great successful sports story, it's more about uniting a nation. And every country goes through tremendous turmoil and issues in society, but if sport can help galvanize people and bring people together, rugby is certainly one of those games. They can bring people together from different walks of life to be on the same team and the same page, and we need to promote that.
Well, unfortunately, it didn't last because of the events of 2020, but we can make the same argument about the 2019 Springboks Rugby World Cup with the Wing Webb Ellis Trophy team. They came back, and for a brief few moments, the country was united once again. It really can have a big impact. I agree with that. Speaking of not wearing kit, did you see Jesse Creel's forehead from a game?
I did.
Oh my goodness. Whoa.
He lost the stitches going all the way across his face. And he's still smiling afterwards.
Okay. He was probably on painkillers, let's be honest. but he got a big grin. Here's my question. Don't they have surgeons in Japan? It looks like Dr. Frankenstein stitched his head back together. It's horrible.
I hope he gets proper surgery there, because shame, that's massive. And I wonder, I didn't see the incident or how it happened, but you're right. Rugby does, well, like any other contact sport, there's going to be some collisions. That one looked pretty brutal.
Well, it was a head-to-head contact. It looked like it wasn't intentional, but it looks like he was leaning in, and they just hit each other head-to-head. It was, man, that was pretty. We watched the little clip of it yesterday. It was like a game in Japan, for the audience that doesn't know. Jesse Creel, Springbok from South Africa, head-to-head, and his head didn't come out of it too well. But speaking of not wearing kit, though, I will say this about rugby union, and this I think is true, and I challenge someone to prove me wrong, is that rugby union and World Rugby IRB took head concussions and head injuries serious far sooner than other professional sports. I mean, they don't wear the headgear other than people trying to avoid cauliflower ears in the scrum. That's pretty much it. But people usually don't wear the headgear. And they've had concussion protocol for years. They've taken it very seriously. Players don't come back to games. It's none of this, I go back in, coach. No. If you don't pass a concussion protocol, you're not going back in. It's a very serious thing. Whereas in the NFL, send it back in, put some Band-Aid on it. Rugby has been very serious about, especially head injuries.
Yeah, and that's very important, right? If you want to promote the game to, a newer audience and newer parents that allow their kids to play, you must make sure it is safe too. Now, obviously, you can't make it completely foolproof. There will be, as we said, contact injuries and things like that. And I think the biggest difference is I spent 7 years in Los Angeles working with Play Rugby USA, which works with inner city kids, promoting the sport, promoting its values. And most of the parents there that I spoke to said to me, oh, rugby's dangerous, it's crazy, and there's blood everywhere. And I said, well, that's what you may have seen, but let's go through the basics of it. Because I'm not wearing a helmet or pads, I keep my head out the contact zone. I always leave my shoulder and I bring my arms to wrap, and I never go with my head towards someone's knees. And so once they saw that in action, saw the technique, they understood why it is safer. And, and all those things are very important to get the message across. And you're right, World Rugby has done a brilliant job of, educating and putting money into research, because it is pretty scary watching some documentaries. One of them is titled Concussion, about the NFL, and how, people turn a blind eye and they keep playing this, keep going because there's billions of dollars on the line, or millions of dollars. Yeah, that's really tricky. Now saying that, there are still going to be Jesse Creels and some big knocks in the game, but again, those ones are definitely ones you can limit by changing some of the rules and laws of the game, which World Rugby has done.
No, absolutely. Listen, any endeavor that Homo sapiens engage in can be dangerous by nature. I mean, the most banal sort of things. We saw this past couple of days that a 19-year-old Russian hockey player died after being struck in the face with a puck. And that's kind of a freak situation. Of course, they're wearing helmets, but it must have I didn't see what happened. Must have come under the visor and hit him here, but he died. And it's so I mean, those things do happen. But Jesse Creel, he's going to have a battle scar the rest of his life. That and Dr. Frankenstein that stitched up his head. I want to meet that guy because I'm never getting care from him. Jeez.
I have a scar here, but you can't really see it. Luckily, it's on the side. It kind of goes to my eyebrows. But I ran into Todd Clever on my own team playing sevens once, and got stitched up luckily behind there. So yeah.
Todd Clever played sevens. I never knew that.
Captain America, of course. Yeah, he one of his most famous clips, Chris, you need to watch it, is diving over an injured player in the Sevens World Series who was getting medical attention from the US physio. And instead of running around the player, he ran for the player and dived over both of them to score. You got to look up that Todd Clever insane American football try.
I will, and that's one of the things about rugby too. That in Major League Baseball, I pulled up, or basketball, I'm hurt. But man, like Danny Barrett with a broken arm rushes back up the pitch and tackles a guy from behind at Vegas in the sevens. I mean, and unbelievable. And there's no drugs here. They're not medicated. Just guys just putting all of it on the pitch, just leaving it all on the field. That's one of the things I like about rugby too. People put their heart into it.
It is. It's a different mindset, isn't it? Danny Barrett's a great example of that. It's a mindset of you never give up, and you have to do everything you can in your willpower to help your teammates on the field. And nobody wants to leave the field, right? And so it's and again that Perry Baker, Colin Niles is a good example. Those players hate being substituted in and out, but again, as a coach, you're like, okay, I know Perry can go for 5 minutes at a time or whatever it is, and then you keep rotating, so you've got the freshest, best player on the field at all times. It certainly helps.
No, absolutely. No, it's across the board. You mentioned a group a little while ago. You talked about Play Rugby. We have two, not particularly well known, but they're known in the rugby community here in the U.S. Two groups that really do a great job with youth. Play Rugby's one. I'm with disadvantaged kids or inner city kids, but not exclusively. But then you also have Girls Rugby, which is a good organization and promotes the game for girls across the country. And that's another reason I really like rugby is that, as you said, anybody can get in the game. A lot of people have this misconception in the States that you have to be like this, massive chest. I mean, you're not a huge guy. I'm not a huge guy, and both of us can play rugby. And Cheslin Colby is definitely not a huge guy, but he hits like a linebacker. Oh my gosh, the hits Cheslin Colby puts on people are unbelievable.
It is, and it's all about technique, right? I mean, even Brian Lima, known as the chiropractor. I mean, your nickname's the chiropractor. You're going to be putting in these hits. It's about timing. It's about using the right parts of your body as well. But yeah, touching on those youth programs, Girls Rugby do a brilliant job of promoting the game and creating role models, women role models in the sport as well for these young girls to look up to. know that they can either get a scholarship to university through rugby, or they can work in the sport, or they can represent the national teams at the Olympic Games, or just Team USA, which is phenomenal.
Well, let me go back to the television thing very quickly here. So the 2019 league, because you can't count 2020, there was no final, but the 2019 final, which was the second season, had a television audience of over 500,000, 510,000. Now, for a lot of people, they might say, well, that's not that big, but that's actually on, like, if you were a cable network, that's a pretty darn good audience. And that's before most people even heard of the league. So I can't imagine what this year's going to be like, but hopefully we'll have a really large audience, probably push over that million point. That'd be really awesome to see that when the finals come along this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And people need to go to the Rugby Network. It's on social media. It'll be an app as well. And there they'll be kind of the hub, I suppose, for Major League Rugby. Major League Rugby's partnered with Rugby Pass. And so they'll have a bunch of content around it. They'll have a weekly show. They'll have the games on there also. And so that's a good way for folks to go to one era. I think it's important to know where to find the game as well. So if you are interested, where do you go next? That's a very important step. So the Rugby Network will be that next step. There we go. You've got it right there. Fantastic stuff. And there's a bunch of great content there as you see it on your screen there. Lovely.
Yeah. No, that's great. I'm glad you brought it up. We wanted to get to that. The Rugby Network, this is a new sort of agreement or signing, whichever you want to call it, or contract, whatever it is, between Major League Rugby and the Rugby Network. So you will be able to watch all of the MLR games for free anywhere in the U.S. I don't know if it's around the world, though, but it is in the U.S. for sure.
Yes, it is. I think they will have international viewing options as well, because that's a big part of their audience.
Sure.
I think the one caveat to that is, let's say you're in New England, the television network.
TV blackout, yeah.
Yeah, correct, exactly. So TV blackout. So NESN will be showed locally here, but if you're in another part of the world, you can watch it on the Rugby Network, which is really great. Plus, it's really good to get highlights and get a bunch of other content around it, and having one central place that is not confusing is awesome. And the fact that it's free, I know one of the hindering parts here is, generally some rugby has been behind a paywall, which is not great, and which means that obviously it's a limited audience, and then of course you need to pay some money for it too. And I get it, you do need to pay for the sport down the line, but for now we should make it accessible and free for everybody.
Well, I absolutely agree. In fact, when I came back from the Rugby World Cup, I wanted to watch the games I attended, on television, and also watch the knockout stages. And the only way to get it was to get behind a paywall and pay for a service that I didn't really care for. And then I was promised I had, for a year subscription. And then, COVID hits and I didn't get any credit. They merged that network into something else, and now I don't have access. And they took the Rugby World Cup games away after 60 days. I thought I paid for a year. So that's very frustrating. So this will be great for fans to watch the league. I think it's going to be awesome. We're going to wrap up here very shortly, but a couple more things before we get there. Sponsorships are coming along now too. I mean, a lot of clubs have got sponsorships on their jerseys. Not a fan of that, but anyway. But they also get sponsorships at their stadium. But I see that Major League Rugby has signed up American Airlines as their travel partner and airline. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, that is big news. I think one thing that has been lacking just in general here in the US is that those partnerships and those sponsors and those sort of agreements, it's always been a little bit of a kick in the teeth when, the All Blacks are signed by an American company, or, some overseas entities sponsored by these big American corporations. So that's always tricky, because there's rugby here, of course, and it's probably much easier to get into it, because it costs a lot less to partner with, Team USA for the Olympic Games, or USA Rugby, or Major League Rugby now. So that's really good. Those partnerships are happening. And the great thing is, once one or two of those get ticked off, then other companies start looking and saying, I want to be a part of that. And again, it's very easy to get into rugby as a sponsor or a partner, as opposed to one of these other big sports that obviously cost millions of dollars to get into. So I think that's really cool. And they also like that each team has inventory and assets that they can sell off as well. So that's really cool. So you've got the league level, and then you've got the franchise level also. So they've got two options to get involved, which is awesome.
No, it's pretty. I can give you a compliment here really quickly. Leuven Janssen van Rensburg says he loves Dallen's attitude. It's so amazing to hear how positive he is. Well, that's a nice thing to say, Leuven.
Thank you.
Okay. So what do you expect to see this season? Any surprises? Any new developments? I mean, is there something going to get our attention in the league, other than the fact that we got rugby back?
Yeah, I think what's going to get the attention is that there's going to be more exposure to the game to more people in the US and overseas, which is great. The level is going to be a lot better. It keeps improving, because you've got these star marquee players as well as the US level of players has risen as well in the last few years, which is really exciting. What else can you expect? I think you can expect a lot of upsets. You can expect a lot of shockers. It's not just going to be one team ruling the league, which is really cool. What I do like is we never got to see it last year. We never got to see an Eastern Conference champion and a Western Conference champion champion. So hopefully we get to see champion crown in each region, and then they face off against each other. That's going to be absolutely massive on August 1st. So we can't wait for that. And then I think the access to players and the access to, behind the scenes, you're going to see a lot more of that content, which is really cool. Makes you see what happens, behind the scenes. Those things will be happening for sure. So it kind of brings you closer to the game.
Well, I think that's awesome to see. I think one of the things for me I'm really excited about is the international audience being able to tune in and watch the game. So it's just not this odd duck that no one's ever heard of. And with Adam Ashley Cooper, Matt Giddo, Ben Foden, Bostro, I don't think is back. Is Tendai Mtaweira going to be back for DC or no? I haven't heard.
No, unfortunately not. The Beast was just here last year, some players have certainly gone on, but new ones keep coming each year. And I think what we saw from last year to this year is that the marquee players have just risen, by 50%. So that'll happen each year. And as I said, each team is picking up a few big names. And also one thing I want to add is some of the teams are picking up players that have lived overseas for many years that may have either been born here or have a relative here. So they're US eligible. So for example, the Free Jacks have 2 or 3 players that are in their early 20s that are brilliant rugby players that could represent the USA. And Gary Gold could pick them up if they choose to go with the Eagles.
Yeah, you mentioned a little bit ago. You talked about the sponsorships. It's embarrassing, when it's overseas teams. It's I still have my USA rugby jersey that has Heathrow Express ads on it. It's Heathrow Express. I mean, I've been on that train. It's like 50 pounds. It's expensive, but why? But that was on USA rugby jersey. That's still one that's making me scratch my head. But hey, a sponsor's a sponsor. As long as it's not some fly by night operation. Okay, so you open the door, Dallen. Before we wrap up, you open the door. Now you can pretend to be an American or ANC politician if you want, but I'm gonna give you a chance to answer this. Who will win the West? Seattle, San Diego, or maybe a new challenger?
I'm gonna say San Diego will play against Los Angeles in that Western final.
Okay.
And I like San Diego. I think they could go through.
All right, we're in accord there. I agree. And that's why I said I may have to change my allegiance, man. There's just too many Blitzboks and Springboks playing for San Diego. Okay, so the East: Rooney, Toronto, or a new challenger?
Toronto were really good last year. You're right. I know your side's Rooney. They're excellent. I mean, DC did really well. So did Rugby ATL. So it really is a tough one. And of course, my allegiance with the Free Jacks as well comes into play. But I have to be impartial. That one is really, you can pick it out of a hat between those sides. And I don't want to disrespect the 6 team in there, but still, any of those sides could come through. I really don't know. I mean, I'm wearing a Free Jacks jersey, so I just got to go Free Jacks.
Oh, that's a cop-out, but okay, I'll let you have that. I'm going to say it's either Rooney or Toronto, although Atlanta and D.C. impressed, but I want to see them on the pitch this year. Maybe I'll change it. All right, so that gets you a final between San Diego and New England. Who's your champions?
Oh, my goodness. Wow, that's a tough one. Based on last year's performance, San Diego, for sure. And they've lost a few players this year, but they've gained a few other ones as well. So I do like the way San Diego play. We'll see how they go. But either way, it's going to be a thrilling final. What we've seen in the first 2 years was that the final was decided in the last 5 minutes, which is really cool and really great to see. So I do hope that as long as it's an exciting game, fans will love it. It doesn't, obviously it doesn't really matter to us who wins,
Absolutely. Clem Molinaric says, nice to hear that a nice and sensible Safar accent is commentating in the U.S. Yeah. So speaking of that, before I let you go, where can folks catch you? I mean, you'll be on the broadcast, so if they tune in for Free Jacks games, but will you cover all the Free Jacks games this year and any others, or just the Free Jacks games?
Yeah, so good point. So I'll be working again for Major League Rugby for the league. So while I do content creation for the Free Jacks, that's not just the one team I'm with, like last time with the Raptors. So this weekend I will be with the Free Jacks. It happens to be LA against the Free Jacks, but next weekend I'll do 3 games and the Free Jacks won't be playing in any of those. So they'll catch me on the Rugby Network or on, if they're watching on television, on some Fox Sports games as well. CBS games, I think I'm on the sideline for one of the games locally here as well. So kind of all over. And my handle is at Dallen Stanford on Instagram and at Dallen_Stanford on Twitter. But yeah, folks can definitely engage, interact. We'll try to bring as much behind the scenes action as we can, starting this weekend in the studios, so they can get a look and feel to see how we do things.
All right, Dallen, I'll make sure I've got those the tags in the video description afterwards. I think I neglected to put them there. Usually I put them, but I don't recall if I did. But yeah, that's pretty awesome. That, I think, was an important distinction so people understand. So you're for the Free Jacks, you'll be doing the similar role you did with the Raptors, where you do video shorts for them and updates and summaries of their games, and then you'll also be doing the other games for Major League Rugby.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. And then when the Sevens World Series kicks back on again, hopefully we back on that series as well, which is pretty phenomenal. Very special to travel the world and deliver the sevens, and use the South African accent to great effect there. Of course, the Blitzboks, such a good team, but then Team USA is so good as well. So.
But the sevens is a little confusing because there was a Spain thing, but that wasn't part of the HSBC series. That was just kind of
That's right. They had to have a tune-up, before the Olympics, and again, there was no way they could bring teams from all over the world together, and so some teams chose to play in a tune-up. Other teams are playing locally in their country, and so it was good that it was a platform that folks could get that hit out, because I know, like Major League Rugby, while obviously it's an important league, going to the Olympics is the next level, right? So you want to be able to play and test yourselves against folks, And just speaking of which, so because this is USA, we want to wish Perry Baker well as he heals from an injury that he picked up in that kind of preseason hit out. So hopefully he'll be ready for the Olympic Games.
Well, I hope so too. It'd be ashamed for this good Olympics and not have him there. Nate Ebner's he's come back from the NFL. He's trying to play for the Sevens. I saw that.
That's right, and he did that in 2016. He came and he was, he made the squad, and a lot of people have commented that's brilliant, and a lot of people have said, oh, he's just going to take a place of a player that's been there for the last 4 years. Well, either way, if he's good enough to make the 12 traveling players, then he's good enough to be there. I do love that he brings obviously a huge exposure from the NFL and folks that follow him as well to the game. He's an unbelievable athlete, and his work rate is unmatched. And so if he can add value to the team, Mike Friday will select him.
Yeah, now just one more thing before you go. It's a little confusing with the Sevens, so we're straight, because you and I are huge Sevens fans. Obviously, you work it, but I enjoy it. I think we both enjoy it. But from what I read, if I understand correctly, there isn't a full HSBC 7 series this year. The plan is like 7 for the men. The women are playing in Paris. I think it's at Marcoussis in May for 2 weekends, which I've been to Marcoussis, so nobody will be there because it's very tiny. But it's also hard to get to. Trust me, I was there at the Women's World Cup. It was a mess. But anyway, the games were great, but getting there was a problem. So then there's 7 for the men, and so not all 10 locations are going to be done this year. I think Vancouver's going to be done, and then Dubai, Cape Town. I don't know the rest of them, but it doesn't start till it starts in September instead of end of October. So it's a little bit earlier, and it's going to end earlier, I would guess.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's still a work in progress, to be honest. I know that the confirmed ones, as you said, are Hong Kong and Singapore. They're all together. That's for the men's series, and that'll happen. You're right, September, October, and then November, December, we've got the Dubai Sevens and Cape Town Sevens linked together, and the Dubai and Cape Town use combined event with the men and the women, which is great. The other ones that are up, they're potentially talking about a Vancouver event, potentially. I know Los Angeles, they were talking about potentially like a tune-up, a scrimmage before the Olympic Games. So there's a lot of talk, and as you mentioned, the women playing earlier in the year as well. So we'll have to see how things go. It's been challenged, obviously, for everybody to put on a international events, especially when it comes for these teams coming all over the world. So we'll see how it goes. And you're right, it'll be a very much a reduced 7 series. And then, because generally, Chris, how it worked is like Dubai and Cape Town were part of the next year. Well, Dubai and Cape Town will be part of the 2021 season. That's how they're going to do it this year.
All right, well, Dallen, thanks a lot. I appreciate it. Listen, best of luck this weekend. Have a good season, Major League Rugby. Hopefully, I'll catch you on the road somewhere, whether it's in Rooney or DC or NOLA or wherever I get to. But I don't think it's fair that they're making you go to Los Angeles. I mean, it's a shame that you have to go out there. I know how much you really don't care for Los Angeles. So I appreciate you taking one for the team to get us out of the gate for a good opening weekend for Major League Rugby.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me on as always, pal, for promoting the game. We'll see you on the beach or on the Sevens World Series along the way.
All right. Cheers, Dallen Stanford. We'll catch you later. Okay, folks, that's Dallen Stanford, rugby personality extraordinaire. I'll let him jump off the screen there. Let me go ahead and, I got to fix that real quick. All right. There we go. Anyway, folks, thanks for tuning. I really appreciate it. It was awesome. My special thanks to my special feature guest, Dallen Stanford, rock star that he is. Really enjoyable conversation. So there's a preview of the 2021 Major League Rugby season, which starts this weekend, Saturday, the 20th of March. Please feel free to tune in. As we showed you, you can go get this app for free. So wherever you're at, go ahead and check it out. Here we go. Put it up here. It's called the Rugby Network. There you go, folks. You can get it on your phone, or you can go to the website, create an account. The account is free, no charge, and you can watch live games on there, unless it's blacked out in your area if you're here in the U.S. But pretty exciting stuff. Anyway, so we're looking forward to this weekend, start of the season. Something nice to look forward to as we hopefully get away from this pandemic nonsense and then get back to sport. So Thanks a lot, Dallen. Appreciate it. Folks, I'll be back on with Debbie Els at 8:30 South Africa, Botswana, Namibia time. We'll be talking about this weekend's Worldwide Rally for Freedom. And I may be on sooner than that because of King Goodwill Zwelithini's funeral, which is taking place. I may pop in and do a little bit of live coverage of that. Anyway, folks, thanks a lot. Hopefully we'll catch you here later on Chris Wyatt Africa. And thank you so much for your time and for your patronage. Hey, Lori's in here from Finland. That's pretty awesome. Thanks for joining us. And let me make sure I got everything off here. I'll catch you guys later. Thanks a lot.